Welcome everyone to our first introductory webinar on post-Islamism organized by the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies. Thanks to our speakers and to the brave audience curious enough to be with us on a Sunday morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're based. My name is Kathya, and I am a senior project manager at the Arab Center for Research in Rabat, and I am glad to be joined by two distinguished speakers to reflect on the concept, on the very meaning of post-Islamism, and provide some kind of conceptual understanding of what post-Islamism means. Also, what are the current trends that we are witnessing within Muslim majority countries as regard the political Islamic movements? And finally, last but not least, reflects on what is the implication of the post-Islamism as a movement, as a conceptual framework on the policy level in Muslim majority countries. So I'm very glad to be joined by two distinguished scholars and thinkers, Mr. Dr. Hasnul Amin, who is currently a fellow at the Pennsylvania University and who holds a PhD in development studies from the Institute of Social Sciences in The Hague. He worked extensively and he works extensively on social movement, post-Islamism in Muslim majority country. I'm also very glad to be joined by Mr. Mohammad Moheq, who is an Afghan scholar and had a master's degree in Islamic theology from the University of Firdausi, Mashhad, Iran. And I first of all would like to go to reflect on the basics and going back to the very concept and understanding of what post-Islamism is. The beauty of academia is that it is still one of the rare space where we have a pluralism and a pluralistic understanding. And post-Islamism, by this same meaning, happens to mean different things for different scholars. So we have the pioneering work of scholar Sept or Olivier Roy, who are trying and who presented a very solid work on understanding post-Islamism in the concept of some kind of exhaustion or fatigue with the Islamist movement as a political movement, but also in the crisis of democratic transition in Muslim majority countries, while other scholars would also look at more of a historical understanding of what post-Islamism meant in different historical period, and maybe to not use any anachronism. I'm not using secularism as a word, but the separation of the religious, the military, and the political life. So without further ado, I'd like to engage the two panelists and two speakers on one of the first questions is that how would you define in your own personal academic journey the concept and the notion of post-Islamism? So maybe we start with Dr. Hasnul Amin, if you want to present to us and to give us your insight on the academic meaning of post-Islamism.
Thank you so much, Kathya, and thank you so much, Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies, for this opportunity. So, post-Islamism, to me, my understanding is mainly based on Asif Bayat's articulation and his analysis of this whole concept, to which I think I have also contributed later on during my PhD dissertation with the further development of this concept. But my understanding would be that actually it reflects the situation of a crisis within the mainstream political Islam as well as what we say the militant Islam. And that crisis actually erupted due to, as Bayat would say, several failed experimentations in different Muslim societies, both to create an ideal Islamic state, are just to create an ideal Islamic society in some countries. And this crisis emerged because those ideals which were presented to society and which were actually articulated in the public discourse, when these confronted the real test, the experiment, these actually failed. And they couldn't deliver those promised fruits to the society. So first of all, this is the condition. The condition is that the society, as well as the Muslim movements, reformist movements, political movements, religious movements, both violent and non-violent, they have been confronting a crisis, multiple crises. So that is one thing. Second, then this itself is a project as well, post-Islamism. So it's not only reflecting the crises, the multiple crises within Islam, but it also reveals that there is a new project, and what that project is. So for Bayat, it is actually not something secular or something anti-religious, as you have just mentioned, Kathya, as well. So it is, for some, it may be a variant of Islamism. So there is still maybe an Islamism as a project, but they are in the post stage of that, and they have been revising several concepts, several frameworks, several policy. For example, Bayat would say that this is now a rights-based approach more to Islam than an obligation-based. So the discussion has moved away from the obligation to the rights of women, rights of environment, of minorities, for example, and youth and others. So this reflects both. I agree with this discussion that political Islam, as we know, Islamism, that is called as well, it has been emphasizing on creating an ideal Islamic state, which mainly emanated from Maududi's at Qutb's political thought, Islamic political thought. And then these several revivalist movements popularized these ideas in different countries, in different contexts. So that crisis has given birth to a generation of new scholars and new, I would say, the antithesis of this whole discussion, and which has seriously made serious revisions to the very popular ideas of political Islam, and as well as the violent Islam as well, as propagated by some sections. So this would be just my initial thoughts here.
Many thanks for that, Dr. Hasnul Amin, and I'd love to hear from you, Mr. Moheq, on how do you also relate, and how does the concept of post-Islamism relate to your work and to your academic understanding of the concept or the neologism?
Sorry. Thank you, Kathya, and I'm glad for being here and listening to Dr. Hasnul Islam and having the opportunity to share my ideas about this subject. And the subject, I think, is very important. As I understand about the post-Islamism, it is optimistic interpretation of the new situation, especially after Arab Spring. What happened in Middle East, in our region, Iran, and Afghanistan, in some areas. Some scholars like Oliver Roy or some others, when they studied about the Islamism, sorry, they have, of course, idea about the background of Islamism from the beginning, from 19 20s when Muslim Brotherhood was established in Egypt. Later, Jamaat Islami in India by Abu Al Maududi, then Hizb ut-Tahrir by Taqiyuddin Nabhani in Arab countries. But Islamism, very important to understand it, then say if we question if we arrive to the stage of post-Islamism or not. You know, during the Cold War, there was a big approach by superpowers and US, Europe, and their allies in Middle East and Arab countries. They tried to push and support Islamism for their proxy war, and they spent big amount of money either by Saudi Arabia or some other countries and Anwar Sadat to support the Islamic groups, Muslim Brotherhood, Salafi groups. They had tribunes, they had organizations, they had opportunity to move from east to west, and Abdullah Azam was coming to the US and for charity or for fundraising. Many of them were going to UK, to Germany, and in Europe. There was a big opportunity for Islamist activists. In Switzerland, Muslim Brotherhood, they made their international organization in Munich, in Germany. UK was a very good place for many Islamist activists, like Abu Qatada Falistini, many others. They were there, and some people were talking about Londonistan as like a capital for Islamists. So it was a political approach that time by many governments. Their main goal was to defeat communism and Soviet Union. It was the big enemy and most dangerous in their eyes. So they were compromising with Islamist group and supporting them or giving them opportunity to be more active and have a stronger role in our area. As I was when I was working in Egypt in 2009, 2010, and 2011. Sorry, during a little before Arab Spring, and during the Arab Spring events, I was there and I was a diplomat and following the situation and analyzing and writing some reports to my foreign affairs minister at that time. In that time, there was different opinions about the future. Some, I'm sorry for coughing. Before that, in 2005, a group of congressmen came to Egypt from the US, and they met with Muslim Brotherhood people in Cairo. And at that time, Egyptian government was very worried about this kind of discussions because they heard that some think tanks proposed for US government that you have to think about the alternative of the corrupted and dictator regime in Arab countries. And they were thinking to replace them by Islamist or political Islam parties like Muslim Brotherhood. After that, there was another negotiation between the US and some Islamist organization in Paris. And Tariq Ramadan was mediating that time between them and Sadruddin Bianouni from Syria. So parallel to what was happening in Iraq after the war. They were thinking of a model of Turkey, Islamic parties there, to bring, to have Islamist allies in Arab countries or some other Muslim countries. So when Arab Spring happened, some of them were hopeful and optimistic, and they were thinking that Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic parties, they will take the control of the government, but they would be allies for the strategic and view for the future against the China, against Russia, and also they can stand against Daesh or some extremist groups. But when they took the control of the government in Egypt, they were strong in Libya. They were part of the political picture in Tunisia, in Syria, and Yemen, and other places. The dynamic went to the other direction, which they didn't expect, or they were not happy with that. At the same time, Taliban were getting stronger in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And it was, there was connections between some Islamic governments and Russia and Iran and China. So this dynamic went to the direction which Western countries were not happy. And not only that, the Arab regime also, regimes like in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Emirates, they were very worried about the future of this wave. So new efforts started to stop the Islamism as a powerful part of the political dynamic in our countries or the region. I think the post-Islamism refers to this new stage, the efforts against political Islam and stopping it and giving alternative. I see different efforts in the region, but I'm not very optimistic about that. I stop here because I'm coughing. I give a few minutes. I take a little warm water, then come back.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. And just maybe to pick where you left it, in understanding that Islamism as a political movement in most of the countries in the region, be it in the Arab world and the larger MENA region as a whole, is coming to an exhaustion, if you want, and there is a certain fatigue that the political movement has not been able to deliver. Both the experiences of countries where Islamist parties have been in power has not been very successful in either bringing the democratic transition that was hoped for, or even improving the economic situation, either because they were not organically prepared to do so, or because of the backlashes and the situations that were put in place. So if we circulate back to the concept of post-Islamism, and we go from the neologism and the academic framework and the concept in which it was born, to understand it is mostly from the lens of trends. And what are, in your viewpoints, I am opening the question to both of you, what are, in your viewpoints, the social, the political, and the economic trends in countries around the regions that are supportive or non-supportive, for that matter, for the creation and establishment of a post-Islamist movement, either as a correction and the corrective movement from within the Islamist movement itself, or as a completely a new movement in rupture with what happened within the political Islam movement? So that the question is open for both of you.
Please, Dr. Hasnul Islam. I get a little water, then come back.
I think it's a very good question, actually, and defining the environment where this whatever concept of post-Islamism we have, it is bound to work. So defining, I mean, the social, economic, cultural context in which it is going to operate and to create an impact. I think it depends, of course, and it is very important. I have two points to make here. One is, I think this reformism, quote unquote, has never been a very popular idea in the Muslim societies. And I think traditionalism, in whatever terms you want to define it, Sufi or mystic Islam, and that has been the mainstay in Muslim societies. Reformism, if it impacts, will be some of the elite sections of the society, or maybe some of the upper middle classes. But as a popular social movement, I think tradition and the mystic Islam has been and is doing its best or its worst in Muslim societies. So that is one thing. I mean, this popularity of, I mean, we can discuss maybe what are the reasons that reformism is not working actually among the popular will. Second is, if we compare, for example, Pakistan and Turkey, for example, so several indicators will actually will also, for example, reformist Islam in Indonesia will be just acceptable maybe, and it will not be called like secular or liberal or something. But in Pakistan, that will be considered secularism, liberalism, and something a-religious kind of thing, and some Eurocentric kind of development. So your question that how the socio-economic political context actually matters. And that matters because in Pakistani society, for example, and the same is true for Afghanistan as well, if you use reformism, here it is interpreted as secularism, and which is something which is in opposition to religion and Islam, or the basics of Islam. And we know the history of it, like late 19th century, Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan to Muhammad Iqbal, to even initial phase of Maududi as well, and then later on Dr. Fazlur Rahman and others. They all actually failed to create an impact on society. And one reason was this equating reformism with secularism. But that may not be the context, for example, in Indonesia. In Indonesia, the students of Dr. Fazlur Rahman, Professor Dr. Fazlur Rahman, the pioneer of Islamic modernism, who was based in Chicago here in the US. So he created an impact on popular social movements, on Muhammadiyah and Nahdlatul Ulama there. He also, through his students, created an impact in Turkey and Malaysia, Indonesia, Tunisia, even one of the former the chief mufti was his student. So, but in case of Pakistan, it is totally different. So, I mean, this is depending on several variables. I mean, the colonial historical condition, the liberation of women. I would say just the visibility of women in a society. I have traveled to all these countries, Tunisia, Morocco, Indonesia, Malaysia, where women is at least visible in the streets and public places. So it creates one kind of, condition in which various religious interpretation can be tolerated and they can make their progress. But in case of Pakistan, for example, and also in Iran and and in Saudi and in Afghanistan, where women is more actually facing patriarchal cultural constraints as well as religious constraints. So, I mean, reformism would mean different thing. And reformism, as in Pakistan, for example, is facing actually persecution, not by the state, by the society. But in some cases, like in Iran, it may face persecution by the state. So, yeah, it depends what kind of political, socio-economic environment is there where the reformism is actually operating. So that is my random thoughts on it.
Mr. Moheq, are you back with us?
Yes, there's some factors we have to consider when we talk about post-Islamism. I think one important factor usually is forgotten is about the population. I mean, when we see the growing up of population in many countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, Egypt, we see middle class people and who are familiar with civic values and modern values, or upper class people. They are not growing fast. As you know, the standard of life, every middle class in the cities, they bring 2 or 3 children, or maximum 4. But I'm not sure if it's correct or wrong term. If we say low class or non-educated people, or who don't have good opportunities, they bring between 6 to 8 children. Within 1 decade, we see the population of the people who are not familiar with modern values. They are 2 times more than the middle class and modern or reformist, as Dr. Islam said. It is a sociological and demographical phenomenon. I focused on that, especially in Egypt. In Egypt, many scholars were talking about that. During the king time in 1940s, Cairo was one of the best city in the Middle East. Cairo and Beirut, very clean, very advanced. It was compared to the Paris and some European capitals. The music, the arts, Kulthum was there, the movies, cinema, intellectual activities, many scholars like Taha Hussein. So it was going to be a new, like a renaissance for, or a pioneer of renaissance for our countries. But 50 years later, it was opposite. In 1940s, also 1960s to 1960s, hijab was very rare among the ladies in Cairo. The beard for men, the number of the mask, it was not more than the other modern institutions like cinema, theater, and universities, colleges, like that. But after 50, 60 years, when we say it's opposite, 80% of women are having a hijab. The art is getting down. Cinema is not going ahead. Many rivers we see there. I think a little bit similarity is in Pakistan. The big big amount of population, many of them, many millions of people, they don't have opportunity or access to the modern education, or the education is not successful. Even in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Egypt, many countries, it's failed. So they don't have critical thinking. They don't have enough resources for good education. Many people send their children to the schools, but they don't get the knowledge which is necessary in this time in the 21st century. So these factors helping the Islamist group, they make alternative by their taste and their method. Muslim Brotherhood had their chain of organization for like clinics for rural area. They had their own schools, many things like that. In Pakistan also, many people send their children to religious schools, to madrasas, because they didn't have chance to send to modern education schools, or they didn't believe in modern education. So when we go to election, it's very easy to have millions of votes for any Islamic party in many countries. It's not because they have, the Islamic Party has better agenda, better proposal for the economy or other services they provide, but because the people, the political understanding or political knowledge of the people is very low, and the scale of what is going in the society, it's more emotional, and they are audience of the mullahs with khataba method, not rational discussions. So our societies, I think, still is very vulnerable to fall in the trap of Islamism. We couldn't create better alternative. The regimes mostly are corrupted in our countries, and mostly are kind of dictator systems. So the people on the street, they are not happy with many political regimes in our countries. Because of that, I'm not very optimistic. If we add other factor, which is like a Middle East conflict between Palestinians and Israel, it is another fuel to push and support the extremist groups and give them opportunity to have propaganda and say the reformism, secularism, liberalism, they are like what happened in Palestine, and they are not they don't, or they have double standards. They don't believe in human rights and children, but happens in Gaza, something like that. So the only change I see in the region, it is the Saudi Arabia different or new approach, and they look serious to bring a reform. And a little bit similar to that I see in Egypt. Some a few numbers of countries, they have a project to stop the Islamism and to create new environment. I'm not sure if they get if they succeed or not, but at least I see a determination there. It is the only exception I see. The other factors are not helping, I think, the reformism and stopping the Islamism. Or we can't be very hopeful about the post-Islamism stage.
Thank you. I just maybe to go from this original broad vision of the Islamic as a political movement, I just want to share some more local insight from my home country, Morocco, and then ask you to see how does it echo in the context, either in your home countries or the countries that you are actually researching. So two main trends when it comes to Islamism as a political movement is that the first one, the Moroccan Islamist movement is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, as it is the case, I think, for most Islamist parties across the Muslim majority countries. But in Morocco, during the recent and the last decades, there is more of a nationalistic new component to the Islamic movement, moving from this kind of more Ummah understanding, this more regional understanding of a pan organization, of an international organization, to appealing to more local elements of what constitutes a Moroccan Islam, for example. So that's becoming an important trend within the political Islam movement, the Islamists in Morocco. And the second trend is that because they have been into power for two mandates for 10 years, they were able to become part of the mainstream political game, if you want. So they're no longer, I mean, people do not look at them with any kind of suspicion, because before there was this kind of hope and aspirations from some parts of the population. And then also there was this suspicion of, okay, I mean, they are political players, but they're not like other political players. They are Islamists, and they are using democracy for their own game. The only part of democracy that they recognize is just the voting process. That's the only element, the democratic elements. And after being in power, then they may turn against all the democratic mechanism that's made them go into powers at the first place. So I mean, if you want, those are the two major trends that I'm seeing in Morocco, and I want to open up for both of you to see and to reflect on how do you see those trends echoing in other parts of the Muslim majority countries. The question is open for both of you.
You are muted, Dr. Austin.
Yeah. So I would say in case of Pakistan, few things have changed. One is, so when I say mainstream Islamism or political Islam, it actually includes both the political Islam, which is, the variant of that Ikhwan kind of Jamaat Islami Pakistan, founded by Maududi and that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is another, which has become over time actually a political Islamist movement, and that is the Deoband's Jamiat Ulama Islam. So that has become actually a larger, bigger political party than Jamaat Islami in terms of votes and seats in the parliament, national and provincial parliament. So these both are actually, so of course there are smaller Salafi and Sufi and other parties as well. And also the Shia presence is there as well, Ahlul Tashayyu. But the mainstream is this one. So one thing I would say, they have retreated from at least 2-3 things. One is that they retreated from this violent kind of jihadist movements in Kashmir and Afghanistan and different places, So Kathya, with the Moroccan, experience, I would say, yeah, here as well, because in case of Pakistan, it was more, the support base was more for this, not only the Ummah kind of discussion, but also the jihadist movements in different countries, from Central Asia to Palestine to, to Somalia, for example. So I think these movements have strategically, pragmatically retreated in the last, specifically after 9/11, when they realized that this thing is no more a sellable thing now in the international market. So actually they retreated from that. Secondly, I would say, of course, when a party is based on the ideology of, Islam and political Islam and that framework, it will still be using these terms in various ways. Sometimes they will say value framework. In other words, another party will be using another kind of framework, but there will be, bits and pieces of it. But I would say that that discussion on creating an Islamic state, and specifically Maududi's notion of an Islamic state which can extend its boundaries to the rest of the world, that has now totally shrunk to the Pakistani boundaries. So in that sense, as Olivier Roy has said, that is the nationalization of Islam. So it is now, so when you say that Jamaat Islami Pakistan, for example, so it shows that it is believing in the boundaries. That's why ISIS, it removed the other from the Islamic State. It removed the Levant and Syria and Iraq, because they said we don't have any boundaries. So the Jamaat Islami and the Jamiatul Ulama Islam, they both, I think, believe strictly in the boundaries. That's why sometimes they are in confrontation with the Taliban, and they are on the target list of Daesh as well. So that's the second thing. And the third thing would be, I think they have given some space to women, and women, at least in the parliament, and that they no more believe that women cannot go to parliament. And it used to be an ideology used against Benazir Bhutto Shaheed in the 1980s and 90s as well. That women, there is a hadith saying of the Prophet that women cannot be the ruler of the country. So I think that is no more a discussion. Of course, there is no woman which is leading Jamaat Islami or Jamiatul Ulama Islam. They are all men, and there are women as well in those parties. But I think they have at least given some space to women participation in the parliament as well. So I think I would say these three things are, although on all these three I have then questions as well. I mean, doubts and questions and shadows of doubts in the Pakistani context. So yeah, that's my response to your question.
Thank you. I don't know, Mr. Moheq, if you have any insight to share on what has been echoed in a case of Afghanistan and Iran, for instance.
Iran and Afghanistan are very different, because in Iran, despite of the theocratic regime, the people are very secular. The most secular society in Islamic world are the Iranian society. I was when I was for master degree in Iran in 2003 and 2004. There was a study about how many people are praying or making salah. In Tehran, 80% said we don't pray any time, and 10% said sometimes, and only 10% were praying. I was in Mashhad, which was a more religious society. For 2 years, I didn't hear azan. It was in high-class part of this city, but in low-class or low level of this city, still they had masjid and azan. Afghanistan is opposite. The society is religious, and but what happened recently after the Taliban taking control of the country, they started to change systematically by the government equipments and money and resources, change the infrastructure of the society, culturally, educationally. Just in last month, their education ministry announced that they established more than 21,000 madrasas in Afghanistan, which their students are more than 3.5 million people. For a society which is all population are about 35 millions, So on 10% are students of religious and madrasas or schools, compared to 18,000 regular school. So they have 21,000 madrasa. So they are more than the regular school, high school and elementary school, like that. It is not only the madrasas. Also, they have another foundations, institutions. They have radio. They have TVs. They have charitable organization. So they are controlling the society. They are brainwashing the new generation, and they suppress any other voice. They don't allow other groups, especially the liberals, seculars, left-wing groups, to talk or have voice. And also civil society organizations, women, they are suppressed. So about Afghanistan, it is very disastrous situation, and we are very worried about the future. It's not only about Afghanistan, about all region, because when you teach and educate and train millions of new generations, which they are extremists, and they didn't have chance to learn about anything except the fundamentalist ideology. They are danger and risk for all the region, for Pakistan, for Central Asia, for Iranian society. And Afghan people are now, Afghanistan like a prison. Every day I talk with my friends. The professors of universities are not allowed, they can't like a post on Facebook because their students are spying for intelligence of the Taliban, and they are under the monitoring, and they can't talk, they can't write, they can't do anything. So then Taliban, this is one important thing to which Dr. Hasnul Islam referred. I was about some political groups. They are only in within a border, national border, and some of them are international. It's very true. But another point that they have very common interest, the national and international groups. I mean, when an Islamist group in Somalia or Libya or in Tunisia or in Egypt, they become stronger, these national groups become happy. Like Jamaat Islam in Pakistan was happy for any progress for Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They are not in the same organization, but emotionally they support each other. For propaganda, they support each other, and there is bilateral effects. Any progress they have in any spot in the world, the other groups invest on that for their propaganda. At the same time, if any problem happen for any group, Islamist group in another countries, they raise their voice here and say, "Oh, Muslims are under pressure, under suppression," like that. So even if they are officially working within their borders, but they have still connections or kind of support for other groups overseas.
So maybe as a last part of our webinar before calling it a day, I want to reflect with you on, I know you don't seem very hopeful in a future of Islamic groups and Islamism and the very idea of reforms within the societies, but just wanted to reflect on the role that intellectual, civil society, pressure groups can have within Muslim majority countries in advancing a series of reforms that are both linked to societal issues, women's rights, divorce, inheritance, but as well to a more profound discussions when it comes to the role of Islam in a political life. And that should be put to an open discussion as a social open discussion on the form of, if you want, secularism that those society wants to have. There should not be one model that would fit all the society, but the readiness of the society is to open up to that kind of discussion. So maybe what in your sense would be the role that intellectual civil society advocacy group can play to advance more toward the reforms?
Mr. Dr. Islam.
Okay. Well, I think I know again it is different case to case. I mean, for example, these days this blasphemy is a huge issue in Pakistan. Every second, third day, fourth day, there is a lynching, there is a mob justice, mob violence. People go and kill the person. So if you are having an enmity with somebody, you just tag him with something blasphemous, anything. And then the people will do actually. So they will take justice, do justice. And it is worse than Afghanistan actually. I don't listen to such stories in Afghanistan. But in Pakistan, on university campuses, I was professor, peace and conflict studies in Islamabad, in mainstream. And I was really afraid of discussing any such thing in class, because you don't know. There is a crazy student, or there is a crazy professor who is after you and who is just creating, a conspiratorial plot against you. And several professors were killed, scholars, politicians. Politicians were attacked, policymakers, judges, lawyers. And the worst thing is that in my village, my native hometown, an innocent person he just said something on the stage, and he himself was a religious scholar actually. But there was a gathering and he said something about the political leader, and then the people started calling him blasphemous, and the police was there. The police was there to protect actually the lynching people, not the victim. And they said, and I cannot go to that village now. So this is so difficult because I supported that person who was the victim and that. So, this has become so difficult. So the thing is that this may not be the case in Turkey or in Malaysia, for example, okay, or even in Saudi Arabia. So that's how, societies are different. I would say a couple of things only. One is that the good news is that at least we have a new scholarship which has created new ideas, which we call counter narrative, okay, which are alternative ideas to these rigid conservative interpretations of Islam, which we all think are wrong actually. But there is a new scholarship. Some is in Iran, Abdul Karim Surush and others. Some are in Indonesia, some are in Malaysia, in Turkey. Some are in exile, I know. There are several Turkish scholars sitting here in US. Mustafa Akul and others. And then there are other, Mustafa Akul and others, the one in San Diego, who was recently, he had to return from Malaysia and Pakistan. And then Pakistani scholars sitting here in the US, Ghamidi and others, who are just reformist scholars, reformist voices. So the good thing is that wherever they are creating, building new frameworks, new ideas regarding women liberties and freedoms should be in Muslim societies, political freedoms, democracy, non-violence, and just criticizing in very harsh terms this whole blasphemy politics and this whole conversion forced conversion to Islam and all that. So I think there is a body of new scholarship. The good news is that. The second good news is that we should increase the level of optimism of myself and brother Mohammad Moheq. That is, we do have civil society groups as well. And these are in various forms, in various shapes, and thanks to social media and Facebook and other stuff, where at least these ideas are shared, produced and reproduced, and through WhatsApp and that, which is actually beyond the control of the radicalists. So I think these are the two good news. What we need to do to impact the policy, I think we need actually a lot of effort by the civil society, because honestly, I doubt the credentials and the will of the political elite in all Muslim society. Start from Pakistan and go back to like Turkey and Tunisia and Morocco. The political elite have very short-term gains before them, and when they achieve them, there's no reform and nothing else is needed. But we need actually, the other day I was talking to Mustafa Akyul, the writer of Islamic Jesus, and recently his other book, Islamic Moses, is published. So we were there on a lunch and I was talking to him in DC here. So I told him, we need people like you as public intellectuals. We don't have many public intellectuals in Muslim societies, who are not in politics and who are not in very, boring, rough academia as well. Academia, when you just write in academic language, you are restricted to just a very limited academic community. We need intellectuals who can engage society, engage with society, both political elite and media, like Mustafa Akyul. So I was just discussing with him that if the Muslim societies have like 20 to 30 public intellectuals who can publicly, without any fear, speak and discuss these ideas of liberties and freedoms and human dignity, and progress, it will create an impact on politics as well. Unfortunately, we don't have. I mean, we either kill them, either we send them to prisons, either we tag them with blasphemy so that their very existence remains, questionable. And either we deprive them of social assets and everything. So, but this is good that there is actually a new generation of young people, both men and women, who have created social spaces, on social media platforms where actually these discussions can take place. And I think this discussion, I call them social non-movements. So these are non-movements actually. So these are smaller, isolated, pockets of engagement where actually we can discuss these new ideas which are challenging conservatism, violence, patriarchy, as well as illiberties in Muslim societies. So that's all from my side.
Thank you for this window of hope, small window of hope, but it is still a window of hope. Thank you very much. Mr. Moheq, any ending remarks that you would like to share?
I think if political will was to support our society to move to the post-Islamism stage, it is possible. And during all the Islamic history from after the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ until now, the political will was very important, either by Umayya empires, then Abbasid, Seljuk, Ottoman Empire, and in modern era, the political approach by the government, as you see in Pakistan, since Ziaullah came to the power, many changes happened. Before that, Dr. Fazlur Rahman was working in Pakistan when Ayub Khan was there. so he had chance to work a little bit. But when Ziaul Haq came to the power, Mawdudi's books was distributed among the army, and Ihsanullah Zahir and some other extremist people were, and they had chance to be more active in the society and have spread their ideology among the people. Right now, what I see in Saudi Arabia and Emirates, in Egypt and some other countries, I am hopeful about that, and I wish that other societies or other Islamic countries also take same approach which is started in Saudi Arabia. It's a good reform, at least in the religious and cultural aspect. I don't talk about the political aspect, it's another chapter. But if it was political will, we can stop extremism, religious extremism in our societies. But still, I see the conflict between the China, US, Russia, and others. It cause that they still think the Islamist groups are working for proxy war, so they don't want them to be died or finished. This is the problem.
Many thanks. We live in, of course, the whole post-Islamism and Islamism itself era under a very complicated geopolitical conditions that sometimes favors movements that do not reflect necessarily the desire of population and of civil society for more reform and for more reformist societies. Thank you very much for our distinguished speakers. I hope that was an insightful webinar for our viewers who were brave enough, courageous enough to be with us on a Sunday evening, afternoon, or morning, depending on where you're viewing us. And I hope this will be a first part of a series of webinars exploring the potential of post-Islamism and the need for reforms within the Muslim majority countries. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.